Today is the 26th of September 2023, and this is an interview with Steve Donkin, who is Support Services Manager at VCAS. So, good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Susan.
Good morning. Thank you for taking part in the interview today.
My pleasure.
I'm just going to ask you a series of questions, and we'll see what you come up with.
Okay.
Right, so to begin with, can you explain briefly what your organisation does?
Okay. VCAS, Voluntary Community Action Sunderland, are the infrastructure organisation that supports something in the region of 300 to 350 different voluntary sector organisations in Sunderland. By default, those organisations tend to be the smaller organisations, but that is something that the VCAS has done since 1973. So we work with organisations to support them, whether it's in terms of support for funding advice, governance, or general support, and being a friend and sometimes a critical friend as well, where people and organisations need to see the wood for the trees.
Okay. Can you describe the main purpose of your role in this organisation?
My role is to engage with as many of those organisations that I mentioned before that need support, to create opportunities for them to come to events, to come to training, to get the support that they need, and generally make them more aware of the support that they have available to them from VCAS. As I say, a lot of the organisations are quite small organisations, and they tend to not see the wood for the trees because they're so busy doing the do that they don't get the time to sit back and think, well, actually, what do we need to do next? How do we take our organisation forward? Or how do we support these people? So I think that's a rough description.
Okay. And how long have you been doing this job?
This particular job, in VCAS, I was invited to join for 3 months about 4 years ago, so I've been here a while, but I've been working in the voluntary sector in Sunderland for around about 15 years now. It was something that I wanted to do. I'm very fortunate that my previous employers in the electricity supply business gave me not a massive pension, but it allows me to do things I want rather than things I need to do. So this was something I very much wanted to do. And around the East End, where my family hails from over many, many years, this is something that's particularly a passion for me.
Right, okay. So how long has your organisation been located in the East End of Sunderland?
Right. I can only tell you for definite in terms of the time that I've been involved with VCAS. I know that VCAS has been around this area, around the sort of the city side of the East End, because the East End obviously goes from the coast, spreads up to the town centre and then stops. But VCAS has been going for 50 years. To my certain knowledge, we've either been around Frederick Street or places around the East End of Sunderland for in excess of 10 of those years. I would imagine probably pretty much all of its existence.
Okay. Why do you think the organisation was located in the East End?
I think it was less located in the East End as located within office space within the city of Sunderland.
Right.
Because the town centre is relatively easy to access for people that want support, and we have members that are in Coalfield, which crosses the other side of Horton. We've got them in Washington, in the north part of the city, and in the west as well. This is a central place where people would come to. So we're not delivering directly to people. So we don't deliver to the community in the East End, but we do support those organisations that are members of VCAS in the East End. And the East End has been particularly active in creating community groups. So something in the region of probably about 40% of VCAS's members are located in the East End, right, which is by accident more than anything else. And I think that says a lot about the East End and the community and the history that it's had.
Okay. How does the location of your service in the East End of Sunderland impact upon its ability to achieve its goals?
Where we're situated now, which is on 15 Norfolk Street, we're sitting in our training room. So it's within, not spitting distance, but within distance, easy distance for people who work in the East End of Sunderland to come and benefit from the training and support that we have. So again, we're not delivering directly to the community in the East End, but those organisations that support people in the community. So I think probably, and this is just my thoughts, that it helps people to get away from if they've got some training or they've got some networking. It helps them to get away from the day job, because if you're too close to the day job, it's very difficult for some people to take their mind off what they need to do rather than focus on other things. So I think it's a good place to be. From the East End point of view, perhaps in terms of the wider community and the whole of the city of Sunderland, perhaps it would be better elsewhere, but it's where we are.
Okay. What people, buildings, knowledge and financial assets already exist in this community geographically that are already utilised or not?
Okay, that's a tricky one. I mean, in terms of the assets, there are organisations who are our members who are situated within the East End. A large percentage of those are, as I said, the smaller organisations who don't have assets as in the physical assets, as in the locations where people are. But we've got churches who are members. We have organisations that have places such as Sunderland Mind. NAREF are based within Sunderland Mind, are one of our members. We've got the Donkin School, and there are other churches there who are members, Hope Church, and other organisations such as Chance, which are down very much in the East End of the city, towards the docks. So we're not a million miles off, but those assets are not supported or haven't been supported, in my opinion, as they could have been over the years. One of the things I've been doing recently because of the project is looking into how the funding, the grants that come from the local authority have been distributed. So if you go back, and I can only go back as far as 2013, and this is not a finished piece of work by any means, but between 2013 and 2023, the council grants are something in the region of £17 million are being distributed, but they've been distributed to all of the organisations, all of the voluntary sector organisations across the city, whether it be Horton or wherever. Within the East End, round about 15% of that 17 million has been distributed to the East End of Sunderland, which includes Hendon and includes other parts of the East End. Specifically within the East End or the East End of Eden project area that we're working in, that goes down to something like 475,000. So of that 17 million, and again, I hesitate to say it because it's work in progress, they've got so far, 17 million, 2.6 million has gone to the broader East End, but only 475,000 has gone to the East End itself. The East End itself is one of the more deprived areas in Sunderland and the country, and it seems somewhat disproportionate how that money is being distributed, but I need to do more investigation on that to find that out.
Okay. I think you may have answered this question, but I'll ask it again. Approximately what percentage of your clients live or work in the East End?
Okay. That percentage in terms of members, so of round about 300 plus members, something in the region of 40% are based within or in and around the East End. However, that's not to say that there are other organisations that sit outside of this specific area. So that's the broader East End. In terms of the percentage of that, oh Lord, that's a very good question. I would imagine that we probably have something in the region of less than 5 to 10% that actually sit within the East End of Eden project area.
Right, okay. So approximately what percentage of your clients come into the East End from other parts of the city?
Our members rather than clients, so they're not service users as such, so they're organisations rather than people, but they do deliver to people who will be in the East End of the city. I honestly couldn't say. We know that it is a good percentage of organisations that get funding, and sometimes that funding overspills into the East End of Eden area, the East End towards the docks area, and we know also that some of our members, such as Sunderland Mind and NAREF, have people who, because of the service they provide, attract people from outside of the area, but I couldn't give you a definitive figure on that.
Okay. So, can you describe for you personally your lived experience of working for your organisation?
Busy, enjoyable. I enjoy working with people, as I said earlier. That my experience, lived experience of working with the voluntary sector in Sunderland, is that there's always more to do, and there's always less to do it with. The demands on the voluntary sector are enormous and getting more so. Yeah, I think I'll stick with busy for now, thanks.
Right, okay. Can you describe for you personally your lived experience of the broader voluntary sector in Sunderland?
Okay. The majority of my specific delivery work has been around the East End, and by that I mean the broader East End. When I got involved with the voluntary sector, it was 15 plus years ago. I'd taken a retirement from, I'd got my retirement from my 25 years employer. I wanted to work with the voluntary sector, and I wanted to work in social care. At that time, I was supporting my father, who was ill, and I'd done a lot of work with care homes, and I'd seen lots of the pressure that managers were under in care homes. So I wanted to do that, and I wanted to work in the voluntary sector as well. Since that time, I made a specific point to start off in the East End because of family history. My family goes back to 1675, but a lot of percentage of that we're based in the East End. And there's a lot of history around that as well. So I felt particularly close to the East End and Hendon and those areas because of that, and because of I still had family living in the area as well. But specifically, I started to, there's a picture of my father and my uncle Bill and my dad, which was taken in the East End, I think somewhere down Grey Street, probably early 1930s. At that time, apparently, so I was told, I've got no obviously remembrance of this, I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. There was the dust cart man would go around, rag and bone man would go around, and instead of giving them balloons or things like that, he would take a photo of the kids. And then the next time he came around, he would give them. So I've got a photo of my dad and my Uncle Bill, and the poverty that they were in at that time. And I started to look at some of the kids that I was seeing around the area, and I started to see, particularly those that were within the BME community as well, I started to see that sort of poverty being repeated, and I wanted to do something about it. So that was my lived experience of why I wanted to be involved. Since then, I've supported BME communities, lots of the BME organisations and lots of other voluntary sector organisations as well. But I guess it's been driven by that sort of history and that family history and the place, and the fact that, my granddad was dragging coal up from Hendon Beach when, in the 1930s when there was a crash. So all of those things are sort of intertwined with the fact that it was something I wanted to do anyway.
In your job, Steve, who are the main agencies and partners in the city whom you need to engage with to fulfil your role?
That's a really good question, and I could spend the rest of the day answering that. We need to work with our members. We need to work with those organisations who provide funding for our members and support for our members. So there is, something in the region of, I don't know, maybe it's about 20 different funding organisations. It would benefit us if we had a good, productive working relationship with the local authority, but that isn't the case. It hasn't been since 2015. The other organisations we work with are organisations such as Shelter, supporting organisations that support people in problems in the community, such as the Citizen Advice Bureau, such as Groundworks. We do get asked for support from the NHS, different parts of the NHS, which are varied, and I don't pretend to understand how they all link together. So it would significantly benefit, I think, the work if we had a clear pathway to understand how the work that we do, the work that the local authority does, and the work that the NHS does, how that all intertwines and doesn't duplicate, because there is an evidence of duplication as well. So that's my answer to that one. We don't have as good relationships with the main stakeholder in the city, which is obviously the local authority.
Right. Can you name the boards you sit on to represent your organisation, and in what capacity you are there?
Okay. I currently am a board member with the Institute for Community Studies, which is part of the Young Foundation, and I'm there as part of their steering group. And the reason that that's been set up is to bring people from different voluntary sector organisations from all around the country to be able to feed into the work that the Young Foundation and the Institute does to make sure that it's appropriate for the areas. So it's a sort of advisory role. I am currently on the steering group for the URC, which is the church, and I've forgotten what URC stands for. United Reformed Church. So I'm part of the steering group for the local United Reformed Church group, which is a group of churches around Sunderland. I'm sitting there as a lay member. Other than that, I don't think I'm on any. If I have, I've forgotten them, I'm sorry.
Right. Can you identify the lead of the boards you attend?
Yes. I think for the purpose, the chair is Christine. I forget Christine's second name. That's at the URC, and the lady who is the head of the Young Foundation that I'm involved with is called Emily, and I can't remember Emily's name off the top of my head either.
All right, no worries. How does attending these boards or committees contribute to the effectiveness of your organisation?
Okay. In terms of the Institute for Community Studies, it gives me a broader picture of what's happening around the country with other voluntary sector organisations, not the same as VCAS necessarily, but who are supporting communities in different ways and in similar ways. So I'm bringing in different ideas, or I get new ideas that come from those meetings, whether they're face-to-face or online. With regards to the work that I do with the URC steering group, I'm there pretty much in an advisory role because they don't have the, scratch my own head here, breadth of knowledge of things that are happening in the voluntary sector. So funding, so if they know, right, you can get in touch with such and such, have you spoken to them? Well, I'll make the link. So that's the sort of relationships that I've got. I don't sit on boards like the NHS or CCGs or other areas. So those are the two.
So on these boards, as a kind of subsidiary to that question, do you feel listened to? And are you responded to both in terms of giving positive feedback and raising concerns on behalf of your the organisation you represent?
Yes and yes. I don't really need to raise concerns. As I say, I'm there as a support rather than being supported. The support that I give to the national body, the Institute of Community Studies, yes, our experience, my experience, the experience of VCAS is taken on board in the same way as other people that are on there. They come from Basingstoke and Edinburgh, all around the country, and Northern Ireland as well. It's really interesting to see the issues, that obviously the problems in Northern Ireland. You get a completely different perspective of what's challenging and what's not.
Right, okay. How could the operation of these boards be developed to improve the effectiveness of your organisation?
Right, I don't think with the URC that's necessarily appropriate. With the Institute for Community Studies, one of the key things, and this started before COVID hit, was trying to get good quality information from people in communities and get that transported to the decision makers, whether that be local decision makers or more so with the Young Foundation, who are based in London, national government. There is a recognition, I think, across all sorts of different areas that the old joke that I use is sense reinforcements were going to a dance instead of send reinforcements. I'll not go through the whole joke, but by the time somebody has identified a problem, or somebody's identified a problem within a community, by the time that problem gets communicated up the line to those that can then make a decision and make a solution or develop a solution, it's been diluted to such an extent that the immediate problem that was down here is not coming back. That's a massive problem that goes through, it's not just in Sunderland, it goes through the whole of the country. So how that person's issues or that community's issues are directly addressed by funding, by support that comes from national government and local government, is massively important. And that's what the Institute of Community Studies was originally set up for. It sort of it didn't fail. It got stalled because of COVID, because it couldn't have those interactions. And it's sort of getting back up to speed now. But that whole process of making sure that what people are saying down here is actually heard at a decision-making level and responded to and not diluted is what this whole process is about. And East End of Eden actually sits as sort of part of that.
Okay. So within those structures, are there cultures and cliques within these boards that you're aware of?
Within the two that I've mentioned,
Yeah.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Right, okay. Do you feel that you can challenge openly in these boards?
Yes. But then again, I'm known for challenging openly on a regular basis, so it doesn't really become a problem.
Are you respected and responded to and valued for doing this?
I'd like to think so. I believe so.
Have you got any examples?
No, I think praise is the absence of criticism for a short period of time. So I work on that basis.
Okay. What do you find are the main challenges of working in the voluntary sector?
More things to do with less resource. There is a general belief that the voluntary sector can work miracles with very, very little. And it's true to a certain extent. I mean, we've got a project at the moment that we're working with the Ballinger Charitable Trust, which is mini grants. And 500 and £1,000 to a small organisation that's working very closely up front and intensely with people in a community can make a massive difference. But yes, yeah, that's it for me. It's about making sure that we try and do more with less, and that's always the case. I don't think that less is focused in the right areas from time to time, and I think again that's part of that process of making sure that the information that's being flown through from need through to delivery is more accurate.
Okay. Looking at the local community living in the East End of Sunderland, do you think that the voluntary sector organisations who represent them are able to provide a collective voice for the area or sector to address its needs on the ground?
Okay. I don't think so as a collective voice. I think there is some fragmentation. I think there is a tendency for some organisations, and this is across the whole of the city, not just the East End, to be favoured above others. So, again, this work that I've been doing in terms of the spread of the grants that have been awarded in the city, off the top of my head, if I mention one organisation in the East End, and I'll not mention names, that's had over a 10-year period between 2013 2023, something in the region of 400,000 to 500,000. Another organisation which is in the East End, but not within the area of the East End, has had something in the region of 1.6 million. That feels disproportionate to me, particularly having spent a lot of time, as I've done, in and around the East End and talking to people in the East End, and recognising some of the problems that they have in terms of crime, just the general litter and mess that people have a tendency to create when people come into the area and they don't value the area as much as the people who've lived there for some period of time.
Okay. Do you think that the voluntary sector organisation provision and structures are in touch with and aware with what the issues are that face lay people in this geographical area?
I think the grassroots organisations are, and I would give one example, without going into detail, of one of our members who was able to identify that a particular part of the community that they hadn't seen issues with before was suddenly they were starting to get service users coming in, clients coming in who were needing support. So they were seeing that at a very low level. The logic, again, without going into detail, the logic of that is if you can solve the problem while it's a small problem, then you spend less money. By the time that problem there has grown to such an extent that local authority and NHS and government is noticing it, all of a sudden it becomes a much more expensive problem, with people not working, people needing to be supported, NHS money being involved, impact on families. It just spreads all over. So I think at a grassroots level, people are able to see those issues. They're not necessarily able to get the level of support in terms of funding that they need to be able to respond to them urgently. And the quicker you can respond to a problem, analogy, the quicker you put out a fire, the less damage it does. In the example, the organisation, if they can solve that problem that they've identified sooner, that will improve life for the individuals concerned. It'll improve life for the families, of which they will undoubtedly have. That will improve life for the children of those families. And it means that they'll probably be able to stay and work. So it improves the life of the community as a whole, because people are able to put back into the community. If the issue's left to get worse, then they won't be working. So therefore, there's a whole host of other stuff. So yes, I think it is, but the support that individuals get and organisations get to do that is not as focused as it should be, in my opinion.
Okay, so this is a kind of similar question, but slightly different. Do you think that the voluntary sector organisation provision and structures are in touch with and aware, have I asked this question before? Aware with what the issues are that face lay people in the geographical area?
It sounds very similar to the
It's slightly different. The question before was about a collective voice. Is there a collective voice?
I think I probably answered it in that case in saying that yes, I think that they are. I think that they're able to recognise those problems as problems are arising. I don't think necessarily they have the resources to be able to respond to them as quick as they would like to.
Right, okay. How and when are you provided the opportunity to feed back on the issues and challenges that face your organisation and the VCSE sector?
Oh dear. Personally, I'm not invited to any of the local authorities meetings that happen on a monthly basis. My invites stopped arriving some time ago. Other than that, I tend to make my voice heard through different means. I use my Facebook, I use my Twitter, and I try to do it with a sense of humour. Not everybody appreciates.
Okay. Do issues get filtered up from the ground? Is this an easy and transparent process?
I think I've sort of answered that before. No, in my opinion. By the time an issue has been identified and then it needs to grow to such an extent, it's the distance away. When people are close to a problem, then they can respond to the problem really quickly. By default, the local authority only will start to see that problem when the volume started to rise or the problem has started to become impacting other areas. That's when we tend to get response. So no, I don't think it does or has.
Okay, so are there accessible structures in place?
There are structures in place. I don't think they're open and accessible. I think that there is an element of political bias. Right. The voluntary sector, depending on who, in total, will consist of something in Sunderland around maybe 500 organisations. We've got something like 350 members. And one of the funders reckons it's about 500. All of those people do not have the same ability to feed back into the sausage machine to get their needs addressed. It is literally, those that shout the loudest, or rather those that shout the closest, that tend to get their issues addressed. And that's indicated, I think personally, by the fact that, if I looked at the funding, when this one is complete, I looked at the funding that came out from the local authority of 2022-23. That was around about £2 million. Of that £2 million, which is obviously public money, of that £2 million, almost 2/3 of it went to just 12 to 13 organisations. Now, if you look at a voluntary sector that has something 300 members, 300 plus members to 500 members, if only 12 or 13 are getting substantial amounts of money to address them, they're larger organisations, but if these organisations down here are being starved of funding, then they can't respond quick enough, and the problems that they're identifying at a grassroots level will only be addressed when the noise or the whatever interference comes out of that is exaggerated to such an extent that the problem is now so much bigger than it was if it had been dealt with at grassroots level. It's a very difficult thing for local authorities to do. I absolutely recognise that. I also recognise as well that that there's a tendency to say, okay, if we've got these 12 or 13 organisations and these 12 or 13 organisations are bigger organisations, then we can work better with them as a local authority because they're larger and I recognise that. And it could be the way going forward that the voluntary sector is. It might be a smaller voluntary sector with larger organisations. That might be the way. At the moment though, it's not being communicated to the people who are working in the voluntary sector. So they're still thinking, this is the way we play the game, but the game's been slightly changed.
Yes. Are lay people supported appropriately and valued and welcomed to feed up their issues?
No. When I look at the sorts of consultations that come out from local authority, they are somewhat biased in their questioning. You know, do you think this? Do you think A, B, or C? Which do you think is a solution? Is it solution A, solution B, or is it solution C? And it may well be that it isn't any of those solutions. It's a bit of C, it's a bit of B, and it's a tiny bit of A. But when you're asked a question like that, is it that one, or that one? Then the solution will not address all of the issues. So no, I don't think that happens. I think that's because of the way that process of transporting information back up from, as I've said before, the needs of individuals in the community gets translated during the process of turning it into a response to the need. And then it's like, well, if we do that, we can also do this at the same time, so that response becomes diluted across other needs as well.
Okay. Are whistleblowers excluded and criticised if they raise concerns?
Yes. That's my answer. I'm going no further with that one.
Okay. Is there anything further that you would like to add about your experience of working in this geographical area?
This area, the East End, is a wonderful place. The people, you know, again, if you look at the history of the East End and how it's developed, it's a community, and it has been a community going back to the 1800s. More people are coming into the area that don't necessarily see it as a community, and that's a problem. But I think that's how places develop. It's a wonderful place. It's got incredibly funny people who I absolutely love, and incredibly passionate people who I equally love as well, who will call a spade, and in your face, and I love that. That's great fun.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes all the questions today, Steve.
Thank you very much.